I looked down at the NDA lying before me, my signature still fresh with ink hardly dry. My hands rested on the polished mahogany conference table, the very same table where I had spent countless years helping build what we once proudly called the Dream 8 years, filled with 70-hour workweeks, missed birthdays, brainstorming sessions fueled by nothing but instant ramen, sleepless nights launching products, and frantic fundraising rounds. And just like that, it was finished. Sitting across from me was Nathan Cross, our CEO. He reclined casually in his chair, acting like this was any ordinary Wednesday. His perfectly tailored suit and smug half-smile made me feel like an inexperienced intern getting shown the door after a summer internship, not the co-founder who had stood beside him from day one. "We've decided to bring in someone with a bit more experience," he said, as if those words somehow softened the blow. "Let's be honest, Jessica. You were never the reason we made it this far anyway." The words hit me like a splash of ice-cold water to the face. I kept my face calm, though inside it felt like the ground vanished beneath me. My throat tightened, but I managed to nod understood, I said, my voice steady and professional until the very end. "That's me. Jessica Hale, former COO and co-founder of Novalink." Nathan didn't even glance up as I rose to leave. His attention was already back on his laptop, probably emailing the board about the seamless transition I walked through the glass-walled office for the final time, passing engineers, designers, and junior staff who had no clue this was my last time there. Some were working on systems I'd personally optimized. Others were debugging code I had helped rewrite at 3 a.m. just 2 weeks earlier. Nobody looked up. Nobody knew I passed Mia, one of our interns who became a developer, and she gave me a warm smile. "Leaving early?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Something like that." My office was already packed up, just a small cardboard box, a ceramic mug, a framed photo of my brother and me from Novalink's first pitch night, and a notebook filled with sketches from our early development days. That was all that remained. But what Nathan didn't realize, what he never bothered to notice, was that I had kept detailed records. Every feature roadmap, every investor pitch deck revision, every product timeline with my initials next to key decisions. Not to mention the full documentation I created for optimizing our core platform, the very work that landed us the $10 million. Series of funding. He thought he could erase me, but I had learned a long time ago from watching my mother build her own business from scratch and then lose it in a shady merger. You never walk into a battle without your receipts. As I rode the elevator down from the 16th floor, the weight of it all began to settle in. I wasn't angry yet, just stunned and disoriented. More than that, I was starting to see things clearly. For maybe the first time in years, Novalink had become my entire life. I had sacrificed relationships, stability, even my health to make it succeed. And now, the man who once called me his right hand had discarded me like an old stepping stone. I reached my car, started the engine, and sat still for a moment, letting the silence fill the space. Then I picked up my phone and called Marlene, my attorney. "It's done," I said. "I'm so sorry, Jess," she replied, calm and collected as always. "Did he say why?" I repeated Nathan's words, each one still ringing like a slap in my ear. Marlene paused for a moment. "Then you still have the files?" "All of them," I confirmed. "Good. We'll talk tomorrow. It's time to review your options." I drove home with that quiet determination that comes after betrayal, when tears haven't fallen yet, but your mind is already calculating, not for revenge, but for reckoning. That night, I sat on my living room floor, glass of wine in one hand and laptop in the other. I opened a folder labeled Nova, Original IP, and began scrolling through files, code versions, pitch memos, contracts, time-stamped architecture diagrams. Nathan thought I didn't matter, but he was about to find out exactly how much I had built, and how much they would need me once the cracks started to show. He believed this was the end of my story. But in reality, it was only the beginning. 3 weeks had passed since I left Novalink. Or rather, since they pushed me out. I hadn't touched my work laptop since I let Slack messages pile up, shared docs go unread, and LinkedIn notifications flood in at first. It felt like a phantom limb. I kept reaching for projects that weren't mine anymore, deadlines I no longer owned, But gradually, the silence became a relief. I started going to bed before midnight. I rediscovered the feeling of weekends. Yet beneath the calm, a quiet tension hummed, like the sensation you get when you know something's about to break. Nathan hadn't contacted me. No one from the board had either. It was as if I had been wiped from Novalink's history the moment I stepped out the door. But I wasn't worried. Not really. I knew something they didn't. You don't rip out your company's foundation and expect the house to stay standing. I hadn't designed Novalink's systems to be complicated, but they were custom-built from the ground up by me, efficient, streamlined, but very specific. And while I had documented the essentials, the true logic, the problem-solving pathways, performance tricks, those lived only in my head and in files that hadn't been shared. I'd warned Nathan months earlier that we needed redundancy and knowledge. Sharing, I suggested training workshops. Not a priority, he said. We'll scale first, then clean it up later. He never liked being told there was a crack in his masterpiece. So I waited. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, the first crack came to me. I was sipping coffee at a local cafe when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I let it go to voicemail. But a minute later, a message arrived, a text from Brian, senior developer at Novalink. Hey Jessica, sorry to bother you. Just wondering if you have a minute to answer a quick question about the data sync protocols you implemented in version 3. I stared at the screen. Version 3. That was the release right before Series A, the one that doubled user retention, built on my load balancing model. Brian had the documentation for that. Nathan once called it Jessica's black box magic. I didn't reply. Not yet. The next day, another message, this time from Kara, lead UX engineer. Hi Jess, weird question. Do you remember where you stored the fallback scripts for the dashboard analytics? We're seeing strange UI conflicts since the last deployment. I blinked at the message. That dashboard hadn't been touched in 6 months. What had they done? Then on Thursday, a third message came in, from Ethan, the junior engineer I'd mentored from his internship days. Hey Jessica, I know it's not really my place, but things are falling apart here. Troy is clueless about managing the system I created, and he's pointing fingers at the dev team. The atmosphere is tense. People are genuinely scared. Just thought you should be in the loop. So, Troy's struggling hard, the so-called real professional. Nathan brought in to take my place. The irony wasn't lost on me for a second. I stared at that message longer than I wanted to admit. Anger should have been my first reaction. It probably should have been. But instead, I felt this deep, cold emptiness inside. I cared so much about that company, the team, the vision. It was never just a job. And now, it was crumbling from within. I picked up the phone and called Marlene. They're starting to reach out, I told her. Developers, engineers, even an intern. She stayed quiet for a moment. So what's your move? She finally asked. Nothing yet, I breathed out. You sure? Absolutely, Nathan made his call. I'm just watching how it all unfolds. Smart move, she said knowingly. Let them flounder just enough to realize who really held the lifeline all along. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox, not from a developer, but a client subject line. Urgent Novalink platform issue, from Sarah Jameson at bridgeware.com. Hi Jessica, I know you're no longer with Novalink, but our team is facing serious challenges with the API integration you initially helped implement. The new engineering contact hasn't been responsive, and we're seriously considering terminating our contract. Can you help direct us to someone who can assist? A client was reaching out directly to me, not to support, not to the company me. That carried weight. Bridgeware was one of our biggest B2B clients. If they were thinking of leaving, the board would freak out, and that panic would ripple fast. I didn't reply to Sarah's message. Not yet. Instead, I forwarded it to Marlene with a brief note. It's beginning. She rang me 10 minutes later. We need to strategize, she said firmly. I nodded quietly. Sooner or later, Nathan would come calling. And when he did, Marlene told me, we make sure it's on your terms this time. By the 4th week, Novalink looked like a termite-infested house, still standing from the outside, but rotten underneath. The website was live. Their recent press release bragged about new innovations and strong leadership. But below the surface, cracks were spreading fast every few days. Whispers floated through the tech circles. Clients complaining about slow support, anonymous posts from developers griping about broken systems and botched rollouts. One even alluded to internal fights among leadership, accusations flying everywhere, but never aimed at the real problem. Troy, the real professional, had taken over all I built. And from what I could gather, he was dismantling it piece by piece. That Thursday, I sat down with Marlene at her office. We pored over my original code documentation, sorted timestamped development logs, and pulled together every email thread I'd exchanged with Nathan over the years, especially those where I'd painstakingly detailed the architecture, only to get his usual, "Looks great, Jess," without a hint of actual reading. "This is incredibly thorough," Marlene remarked, tapping a printed thread. "You could build a rock-solid case for misattributed ownership if this escalates." "I don't want to sue," I said quietly. She lifted her eyes. "I don't want revenge, Marlene. I want acknowledgement. I want them to openly admit that I mattered, that they can't function without me, that they were wrong." She nodded slowly. "You don't have to destroy them. You just need the truth admitted." Right on schedule that afternoon, my phone rang. Caller ID, Nathan Cross. I let it ring through. He called again 10 minutes later. Then came a text message. "Nathan, Jessica, I think it's time we talked. We've hit some unforeseen issues, could really use your expertise for a brief consultation. We're happy to offer generous compensation." I stared at it, a half smile tugging at my lips. Generous? I mused funny how the man who once said I wasn't the reason we made it this far was now scrambling to get me back. I held off replying immediately. Instead, I forwarded the message to Marlene. "He's reaching out," I said. "I told you," she answered quickly. "Let him stew. The longer he waits, the more valuable you become." The next day, Nathan sent 3 more messages, each shifting in tone, from polite to urgent, then vaguely apologetic. "Look, Jess, I was probably harsh when you left. It wasn't personal. You know how stressful this industry is. Let's talk." I waited until Sunday before responding. "Hi, Nathan. I'm currently tied up with other commitments and can't take on new work. Thanks for the offer. Hope Novalink is doing well." Short, polite, non-committal. He called immediately after this time I answered, hearing panic in his voice. "Jessica, thank God I know things were tense, but we really need your help. Troy's having issues with some of your systems, causing delays." I sipped my tea. "Sorry to hear that. But how can I help? I don't work there anymore, remember?" "Don't be like that," he pleaded. "I'm offering real money, 6 figures for a short-term contract." I paused. "That's generous, but didn't you say I wasn't the reason Novalink succeeded?" Silence, then a cough. "Maybe I underestimated your role. The product's not working right. Clients are upset. The dev team's overwhelmed. We need your insight." I let the silence stretch. Let me think it over. I hung up without a goodbye later that evening. Marlene and I met for a late dinner. I spilled everything. "He's desperate," I said, "but not desperate enough to admit what he did." Marlene smirked. "Give it time, a few more missed deadlines, some lost clients, and he'll be saying your name like a prayer." I stared at the menu but wasn't really seeing it. I don't want to go back, but I want to be the one they call when everything falls apart. "You already are," she said. "They just don't realize it yet." I gave a faint smile. For the first time since my firing, I felt it. Not just relief or satisfaction, but power. A quiet power, built not on revenge, but on hard-earned truth. And I was only getting started by the 6th week after leaving Novalink. My phone wasn't just buzzing with messages from anxious developers or frustrated clients. This time, the message was from someone higher up. Subject: quick chat from Rachel Langston at brighteject.com. Rachel Langston, one of our Series A investors. I remembered her well. Sharp-eyed, brilliant, always the quietest but most influential voice during pitch meetings. If Rachel was reaching out, something major had shifted. I opened the email. "Hi Jessica, hope you're doing well. I'd like to have a quick chat about Novalink, particularly some of the recent platform problems and your involvement in the original system architecture. Could you spare about 20 minutes this week?" Rachel wasn't fishing for gossip. She never wasted time, she wanted hard facts. And the fact was, Novalink was unraveling without the foundation I'd laid. I immediately forwarded her message to Marlene. Her reply was almost instantaneous. Talk to her, just be cautious. No NDA breaches, but general insights about your early work are fair game, especially anything predating your employment contract. We set up a Zoom call for Wednesday afternoon. When Rachel appeared on screen, she looked exactly the same. Sleek black blazer, perfectly neat bun, eyes that didn't tolerate nonsense. "Jessica," she greeted with a polite smile, "thank you for making time." "Of course I've heard Novalink's had a tough few weeks." Her smile tightened. "That's putting it mildly." I waited. "I'll be straightforward," she continued. "We've lost 2 major clients in the past 10 days. They cited platform instability and poor communication. When we pressed the executive team for explanations, all we got were vague answers." I stayed silent. Rachel raised an eyebrow. But then someone sent me an internal memo, a message from one of the junior engineers. He said the authentication and integration systems were entirely your design, and since you left, no one's fully been able to manage them. I took a steadying breath. "The architecture you're talking about?" "Yes, I built it from the ground up before funding, before a CTO, before even a product roadmap." She nodded thoughtfully. "So what happened?" "You'd have to ask Nathan," I replied cautiously, though I imagine he'd say they needed someone with more experience. Rachel didn't flinch. "He told us you were heavily involved in implementation, but not the core strategy." I smiled. "Interesting, because I still have photos of whiteboard sessions from our first planning meetings, my handwriting, my diagrams, Git logs with timestamps from months before we pitched Bright Edge." Rachel's expression shifted just enough to notice. "I'm not here to stir trouble," I added. "I just don't want to be erased anymore." "I respect that," she said. "And to be clear, I'm not trying to trap you into breaking any agreements, but I need to know, is the core platform something only you fully understood?" "I personally built the authentication layer, the load balancing system, back and failover sequences, and a large part of the dashboard logic, all customized and optimized specifically for Novalink's user flow." She nodded again. "And Troy?" I asked. "How is he managing?" She didn't answer, but I didn't need her to. "I see," I said. We sat quietly for a moment. "To be honest, Jessica," Rachel said finally, "we have an internal meeting with the other investors this Friday. There's growing concern about leadership and possible misrepresentation. I'd like you to attend strictly as an observer, if that's more comfortable." "I'll need to talk to my attorney," I replied. "Of course." After the call, I stared at the blank screen, feeling that familiar fire rising inside, not anger exactly, but the unmistakable sense that the tide was turning, the same feeling I'd had during our first funding meeting, when we got that initial $250,000 angel investment. Back when it was all still a dream, I called Marlene to fill her in. "Rachel Langston wants me there," I said. "That means the board's starting to see the cracks Nathan tried to hide." "Does she want you to speak or just sit in?" Marlene asked. "She said observer, but we both know if I show up, they'll ask questions, and I'll have answers." Silence then. Then we prepare. Friday dawned gray and tense. I arrived at Bright Edge Capital's downtown office 20 minutes early. Marlene was beside me, sharp in her navy blazer, carrying a leather folder that held more power than most realized. "Remember," she said as we reached the glass doors, "you're not here for revenge. You're here for recognition and leverage. Let the truth do the talking." I nodded, pulse quickening inside. The conference room was quiet, but charged. Around the long table sat Rachel Langston and 2 other Bright Edge partners, one from a strategic tech fund I recognized. Opposite them were Nathan, Troy, and 2 Novalink board members who looked sleep-deprived. Nathan's face went pale the moment he spotted me. He hadn't been warned. "Jessica," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "I was invited," I replied smoothly, taking a seat next to Rachel. As an observer, Troy stared down at the table. Rachel began by outlining the agenda. On the surface, it was about performance problems, missed goals, and unhappy clients. but everyone knew it was really a reckoning of leadership. "We've seen a 17% drop in enterprise usage over the past month," Rachel said, flipping through a report. "Support wait times have doubled. There's been churn in your dev team, and the last software release caused 3 major client systems to crash." Nathan shifted uneasily. "We're aware of the issues. We've been working nonstop to stabilize things." "Yet," one investor interrupted, "we keep hearing the same complaints from technical staff and clients. They don't understand the system." My name landed like a hammer. Nathan opened his mouth, but I spoke first. "I won't comment on current operations," I said, "but I can confirm that the core systems, including architecture, security frameworks, and internal tools, were developed and implemented by me. I wrote the original codebase, documented the structure, and maintained version control until my departure." Rachel nodded. "We've reviewed her documentation. It's extensive, time-stamped, and verified." Nathan leaned forward, voice tight. "With all due respect, Jessica was under contract. Everything she created during her tenure belongs to the company." Marlene didn't flinch. "You're referring to the standard employment agreement, which we reviewed thoroughly. But the authentication layer, the system powering Novalink's client security and data synchronization, was developed by Jessica before her employment began. She has GitHub repositories dating back a year prior and integrated it into Novalink transparently. There's no signed intellectual property transfer covering pre-existing work." Silence fell. Heavy and suffocating, Troy finally spoke, voice barely audible. "I wasn't able to reverse engineer it. We've tried. It's too customized." I glanced at him. He looked worn out, not arrogant. Just small. One of the board members, Alan, I believe, looked directly at Nathan. "You told us the system had full redundancy, that we could scale whether Jessica was here or not." Nathan swallowed hard. "I believe that was the case." Rachel then turned toward me. "Jessica, if you had stayed, what would you have done differently?" I hesitated before answering honestly. "I would have trained internal engineers, developed a comprehensive knowledge base, built sustainability, but none of that was ever made a priority." Marlene slid a printed email across the table. Nathan's response was boldly highlighted at the top. "That's not a priority right now. We'll fix the documentation after funding." Rachel exhaled deeply and addressed the board. "I believe the situation is clear. Novalink's product integrity depends on a system we do not fully control, built by someone no longer with the company and now being misrepresented as internally owned." "What are you proposing?" one of the board members asked. "2 things," Rachel replied, locking eyes with Nathan. "First, a formal correction of the record. Second, a licensing agreement with Jessica Hale for the use of the authentication framework, fair compensation and clear attribution included." "And Nathan," another investor interjected sharply, "what's your take on this?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "That's for the board to decide." Nathan looked at me then, not smug, not superior, just cornered. I said nothing I didn't need to. 2 weeks after that investor meeting, the news broke. Novalink announces leadership restructuring amid technical turmoil. The press release avoided naming Nathan directly, but tech blogs quickly connected the dots within days. LinkedIn buzzed with rumors, quiet reshuffling, executive exits, and Nathan taking a temporary advisory role. Meanwhile, a new name trended across platforms. Mine, Jessica Hale, the architect behind Novalink's system. It felt surreal. After years behind the scenes, buried in code and pitch decks, suddenly, I was more than just the one who was fired. I was the indispensable architect. Rachel Langston reached out again. This time, not as an investor cleaning up a mess, but as a strategist with a proposition. "We want to restore stability," she said publicly. "And internally, the board unanimously supports offering you a formal position. CTO, with full creative control over the technical team, will handle PR. You name the terms." I didn't respond immediately, not out of doubt, but because I was still processing how much had changed, how fast the girl who once begged for a seat at the table was now being asked what color she wanted her chair to be. Then, as if clockwork, my phone rang. Nathan again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Nathan." He sounded tired, humble. "Jessica, I wanted to call and say thank you." "For what?" I asked, keeping my tone calm, grateful only he hadn't thrown me under the bus before the investors. You did that on your own, I replied, honest but not unkind. He sighed. I messed up. I got caught up in appearances. The optics, I didn't see the foundation because I was blinded by the spotlight. And now I see it. Everything you did, everything you built, I wanted to apologize. A beat of silence followed a year ago. Hearing those words might have brought tears. Now, I just felt still. I appreciate the apology, I said, and I truly hope you've learned from this. I have, he said. I already have. We hung up without another word. That same evening, I met Marlene to finalize the licensing agreement. It was clean, airtight, and heavily in my favor. I retained ownership of the authentication system and would receive royalties for its ongoing use in Novalink's platform. More importantly, a public statement was scheduled for release the following week, correcting the record I would no longer be a ghost in Novalink's history. The next morning, I stepped into Novalink's office for the first time in nearly 2 months, not as an employee, but as a licensed partner and newly appointed CTO. The space looked familiar, but the energy was different. Developers glanced up as I walked by. Some whispered Ethan, my former intern now a full engineer, grinned and approached. "You're back?" he asked, eyes wide. In a way, I smiled later that afternoon. I convened a meeting with the entire tech team. I didn't come with threats or blame. I came with a plan. We're rebuilding from the inside out, I told them. Not just the code, but the culture, the documentation, the trust. They leaned in by the hour's end. For the first time in ages, I saw genuine belief return to their eyes. Over the coming weeks, we made changes, hiring fresh talent, restoring confidence, fixing broken systems. Clients who had left began returning. Investor faith was rekindling, and the team thrived. But more than that, so did I. I no longer had to prove my worth silently. I no longer had to watch others take credit for my hard work one afternoon. After a smooth product rollout, I received emails from recruiters, then another, then a third. Not just job offers, but partnership proposals. That's when it truly hit me. Nathan's phone rang when things fell apart, but now mine rang for something entirely different. Possibility. A month later, I stood on a small stage at a Women in Tech summit, delivering a talk I'd once dreamed of giving. When I was fired from the company I helped build, I said, I thought it was the end of the story. But it wasn't. It was the moment I stopped merely surviving and began building something better, on my own terms. Applause filled the room. Afterward, a young developer approached me, nervous. I don't mean to be weird, she said, but your story saved me. I was about to quit tech entirely, but now maybe I'll stay long enough to build something of my own. I smiled. Good, I said. Just remember, the foundation they try to bury you under is often the one you end up standing on. And that was the truth. I didn't rise by tearing anyone down. I rose because I remembered who I was. And this time, no one would forget.